to Framework and Formula for Writing Meaningful IEPs. This is the first module on IEP-worthy outcomes, and in particular, we're on the first of 4 lessons under this module of IEP worthiness. And in the first module, we're going to talk about present levels of academic achievement and functional performance, otherwise known as a PLAF. It used to be a plop, so if you think PLAF is bad, plop wasn't much better. But let's talk about present levels, and I'll just use that phrase present levels as shorthand for present levels of academic achievement and functional performance. So before you get like, oh, already too much lingo, too much jargon, let's just think about what really we're talking about. So for me, I'm using these 4 images to really depict what we mean by a present level. It's something that is really talking about coming from a place of strength. And so that's why we have this oak tree. And you might be thinking, wait, we're supposed to be identifying needs and these are kids with disabilities. And so why are we talking about strengths? But we're always going to talk about from a baseline perspective, which is the other image of the graph or the data, is that this is a baseline, and baseline always includes what is currently going on. And part of where we build and promote growth and development is always reaching for the zone of proximal development. And we can't do that. We can't reach that correct zone. We can't sort of hit the sweet spot unless we know where kids are currently, and that includes their strengths. So we're both strength-based, so we have this big strong oak tree, and we're data-based. So we have this idea of getting baseline data that tells me exactly who, what, when, where, how often, how well, how much support, all that good stuff. We're also really specific. So this might get to be making our present levels longer than maybe our IEP software likes, or the form, or even some of our team members. But it really takes being specific. That means including examples, unpacking and defining all of the jargon that we use. And so we really want to be on target and think about being really specific about what's going on for this particular child or student. It's also a map. It's this sort of link or guide, or sort of, to me, it's the connective tissue. It's everything in the IEP centers around the present level. So no matter how well you write goals, no matter how well you do inclusive services, no matter how well you're able to provide accommodations, none of that matters if you don't have a strong roadmap. You have to have a guide of where we are, where we're going, and how long do we think it'll take to get there, and what's the best way, what's the best route, what are the barriers we're likely to run into, and how can we avoid them. So we really want to have this map that is going to allow us to be guided in every subsequent decision that's made. So we're strength-based, we're data-based, we're really specific, and we have the present level serving as a guide. And so this means that it's comprehensive, it's thorough, it's going to be based on kids' needs, sure, and it's super detailed. So let me give you kind of a quick glimpse at what all of those synonyms kind of look like, right? So let's say you have a child who has some social emotional needs, and increasingly, this is all of us. So once the team has decided that these needs are a result of the child's disability, or having an adverse effect, are something that would require specially designed instruction, and is something that we can achieve this year, we start to unpack that. Well, we can't just say the child will improve social emotional health and well-being. Sure, that's the dream, the vision, but we have to really dig deeper. So as we're trying to get more targeted, as we're trying to get more specific, we're still being holistic. I know that sounds like both sides of my mouth, right? And it's another one of those paradoxes that we're trying to be both comprehensive and specific at the same time. So comprehensive meaning, what part of social emotional? Is it self-regulation? Is it impulse control? Is it about attention? Is it about interacting with others? Is it about responding to stressors and sensory needs? Is it all of the above? So we're really digging and peeling back. What do we mean by social emotional? And then we get specific, and we start writing about and talking about what the child is currently doing in terms of each of these layers of the need. So there's this big need of social emotional, but each layer, self-regulation, unpack, relationships, social communication, impulse control. If we don't understand and define these words and then begin to describe a child's performance in relation to these layers, we won't have an accurate guide in the end. So what's the formula for success? How do we write a good present level? Well, actually, there's lots of good examples out and about. You can Google it. Anything that Barbara Bateman writes about is really helpful. You might even just turn to your own state or district or agency to kind of see if they've put some models out. So I'm going to give you more of a guide or a formula. We'll look at one example quickly, but really it's so hard because writing IEPs is an art and a science, and writing present levels also an art and a science. So some things in your formula, some things that you might always want to include. And in lesson 1 of module 1, I've included a checklist that you can download and have right beside you as you and your team members are developing present levels. Just sort of a checklist. Really, it's a set of guiding questions to consider. A checklist seems like you have to have it or it's wrong. And again, that art and science isn't quite that easy. It's really up to the team to make the case. And so including the child's name, their age or their grade, and starting off, remember, we're talking about strengths. So what are they able to do? What do they enjoy? What does it look like in a daily routine as it's related to this identified need? You can also talk about what the child currently doesn't do or has difficulty doing. It could be a list of things, but it's really describing how their day, how their interaction, how their participation in an event or routine looks. So you're going to tell a story. You're going to talk about what's not going well. You can also talk about something about like what they can do or what they do engage in with supports or with needs or in a certain way. So if it's hard for you to list what they don't do or what they have difficulty and you're still kind of wanting to be strength based, here's where you can describe what they can do, what they can complete, what they can engage in, but the types of supports and the types of needs that they require. Again, you're starting to build your case for what you're going to write as IEP goals, what kind of supports and services you're going to offer, and what kind of accommodations and modifications may be needed. You can also describe what's kind of getting in the way. So even though we talk about what the child or the student can't do, this is so important. We've got to say, so what? Why is that important? So they don't know how to name letters. What's getting in their way of accessing, participating, and making progress? You also want to be able to describe, again, that baseline, what's happening currently. And this is where you can use words. You can use numbers, so it could be quantitative or qualitative. Measurable just means I need to be able to observe it and I can see change or a difference over time. So when is this happening? Where? How often? In what way or under what conditions? With what types of supports? For how long? With how many errors? It could go on and on. And in another lesson, we'll talk more about how to really think about measurable criteria. But it gets started not just when we're writing IEP goals, but back in the present level, that when we're writing that baseline, we have to have measurable criteria here as well. So you can also describe how all of this is affecting the students' access, participation, and progress in the general curriculum and as appropriate activities for preschoolers. So again, I'm just asking you to go back even after you've listed the things and kind of alluded to how this is sort of a disruption or an issue or a concern or a need, but have you built the case? So I'm saying it to you again. So what? Why? What is the impact? How does this affect access, participation, and progress? And then oftentimes the last part of the formula is to sort of couch this in what we would expect from typically developing peers or at a particular age or at a particular grade, we expect a child to be able to do X, Y, and Z. So you're just kind of couching it in terms of known human development. Be careful here because there may be expectations set forth by a district or an agency or even a state that aren't developmentally appropriate. So just because a state may require a child to do X, Y, or Z, if you know that is not developmentally appropriate, or in the case of this child, it's not really something we should expect yet, it doesn't automatically make it IEP worthy. So here's an example. You're going to want to pause the video and just sort of take a second and read this statement. Is it everything that we just talked about in terms of the formula? Well, pieces and parts, not bad. You'll see that we've really been strength-based. You've got a clear description of what the child's currently doing in terms of letter identification, but there's something really important that's missing. So pause the recording, read the paragraph, and then come back and see if you can say out loud to your friends, if you're doing this with other colleagues, what is missing. What's also interesting, so did you find it? Let's see, right? So I'm not going to tell you the secret. I'm going to ask you to do your activity at the end of this lesson to get a little bit more practice, but it should be clear now that there's something important missing. One of the things you might hypothesize is what I just finished talking about in terms of what's developmentally appropriate. And so some of you might have said, hey, should kids know 20 uppercase and 20 lowercase? That's not quite it. That is an issue, but it's not what's important that's actually missing from this present level. So you might need to pause it again, go back through the formula for success, download the handout with the guiding questions for lesson 1, and see if you can find it. But as a side note, this 20 uppercase and 20 lowercase, depending on whose state standards you're looking at, which agency standards, how old the child is in terms of, did they just turn 5? Have they had any previous preschool experience? All of these things matter. And there's very little research to show how many upper and lowercase letters are really predictive of later success in reading. There was an article by Piazza and colleagues in 2012 that showed that there should be 18 uppercase and 15 lowercase. So already you could suggest that if this child were 5 and just entering kindergarten, that they may or may not should even be able to do 20 and 20. So that's just a little side note. But again, make sure you've paused long enough to read this statement and compare it with the formula for success as well as lesson 1 of module 1's guiding questions to see if you can figure out what's missing. So the other activity that is contained in lesson 1 of module 1 is an opportunity to read kind of shorter present level statements. And you're going to decide, are they good, are they bad, are they both? And so I'm using sort of this red-green card analogy. If you were a referee, you would hold up a green card or you would hold up a red card. And this might be just something that you do on your own to practice, and or it might be something that you do with colleagues, or if you're offering professional development, an activity you might do with participants, just to see if you can get agreement on what's a good present level statement, what's not so good, and where is there sort of this grayness where some people are like, it's not bad, and you might be surprised about the art and science kind of rearing its head as you work your way through that activity. So how do we get there? Meaning, how do we get to the gold standard? How do we get to the good quality present level? Well, in a nutshell, we sit beside and get to know children. And so the heart of a good present level stems from engaging in authentic assessment, where we have familiar people in familiar settings with familiar objects doing familiar things with a child. If you have not engaged in authentic assessment, if you have not sat beside to get to know a child, it's going to be really hard to write a good present level. And then we know our present level is our guide. And so I'll trace it backwards, right? Without the guide, we're not going to be able to write IEP goals, determine supports and services, and we only get to a good guide through authentic assessment. We also have this little thing that we call data-driven decision-making. And so some people are able to do authentic assessment in terms of observing and good interviews, and they document it, and they do a play-based arena assessment, and they summarize it, and they're very strength-based, and it's all holistic. But then we jump straight to, okay, what should be your IEP goals? And we don't land at this step 4 and say, oh, what are the patterns and trends that I'm seeing? I got to examine or analyze the data before I can interpret and make sense of the data to begin to write a present level as my interpretation. So how do I really analyze my data? You're looking for patterns. Patterns are these reoccurring things. So we're going to offer up 6 different patterns. Patterns of strength, patterns of unexpected performance, patterns of quality of actions, patterns of need for assistance, interfering behaviors, and time to action. So if you want to learn more about these, you might be wanting to take one of my deep dive courses on writing IEPs, where we're going to go deeper into this data-driven decision-making model, deeper into analyzing them, and then deeper into these 6 patterns or trends. But for now, a place you can begin. So this is called the Can-Do Planning Strategy, and it's one of our handouts for Module 1, Lesson 1. And it's just very quickly, it's a way that a team can begin the conversation to begin to analyze their data without having to go to much effort and much time. So you can set a time limit, and each quadrant is a certain amount of time, and you say, what is the child currently doing? Hey, that sounds like something we just talked about in terms of their baseline. Yep, this is sort of a verbal way to start fleshing out the present level. What does the team want to see the child doing? Great, this starts getting at what are expectations. Are they developmentally appropriate? Have we peeled back social emotional well enough? People can't just say, I want them to be regulated. Well, what does that mean? What does it look like for a 5-year-old to be regulated? What are the possible solutions? This is a fabulous place to go, hey, maybe we should adjust our expectations, or maybe we should do some class-wide interventions before we think about that this is really something that is worthy of an IEP. And then really, what are our priorities? Do we understand what is the common trajectory? Do we understand when we look at all of the child's needs, where should we put our energy? There might be a lot of stuff going on, so where should we begin to prioritize? So this can-do planning strategy is just one way that a team can begin to get to that gold standard of a present level, not worry about the formula for success, not worry about if they've got everything in the right grammatically correct flow, but really have a conversation that allows them to take their authentic assessment information and walk through a data-driven decision-making process where they actually analyze the data. And so they're taking all that rich information and answering, what is the child doing? What does the team want to see the child doing? What are possible solutions? And what are our priorities? So that is lesson 1 of module 1. The next one that will be lesson 2 of module 1 is all about what we call 4 filters. How do we start to really determine what becomes an IEP goal? What's worthy of, from this present level, moving into writing an IEP goal?